Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. After visiting Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan and Latvia, Premier Li Keqiang is paying an official visit to Russia, the last stop of his 8-day Eurasia trip. Against the backdrop of a weak global economic recovery and the wrestling of major powers, what pragmatic results will his trip deliver? How are they going to shape the world order? How should we view the future of the Eurasian region? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Hua Liming, China's former ambassador to Iran, and Gautam Mukunda, assistant professor at the Harvard Business School. And we shall also be joined by Alexander Lukin on the phone, head of Department of International Relations at National Research University from Moscow. But before we get started, let's look at this.
On November the 6th, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang arrived in St. Petersburg for the 21st Sino-Russian Prime Minister's regular meeting and an official visit. After the meeting on Monday, Premier Li and his Russian counterpart, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, witnessed the signing of 21 agreements which further promote cooperation between the two countries in various fields, including high-speed railways. In the past 2 decades, bilateral trade between China and Russia soared rapidly and hit a historical high of $95 billion in 2014. Energy is a key cooperation sector, and China and Russia sealed a crude oil pipeline contract in 2012. The China-Russia East Route natural gas pipeline will become partly operational in 2018, and a West Route is also under discussion. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the China-Russia Strategic Partnership of Coordination.
Russia and China are the largest neighbouring countries and all-round strategic partners. Regular meetings of the governments have never been interrupted for the past 21 years. We always hold our meetings on the scheduled dates, and this is also evidence of the stable and dynamic development of Russia-China relations.
Russia and China are tied by the strategic partnership and cooperation relationships. We're friends indeed. We have a similar approach to solving numerous global issues, take part in many multi-sided formats, including, of course, platforms like UN, G20, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and implement large-scale projects, including the major idea to combine the Eurasian Economic Union and the Silk Road Economic Belt.
In the newly issued joint communiqué, China and Russia agreed that great potential exists in bilateral trade and investment cooperation. The two countries would deepen economic integration through building a mutually beneficial economic partnership in Eurasia. China and Russia also published a joint statement on the result of the two countries' first ever joint border inspection, which was started in 2011.
Gentlemen, over the past 2 decades, premiers from the two major economies have met for 21 times. What's special about this current visit by Premier Li Keqiang to St. Petersburg, hometown to Dmitry Medvedev?
It's true that between Chinese and Russian leaders, there have been frequent visits to each other. I think just 2 months before, President Xi Jinping met President Putin in Hangzhou of China. I think that at least the two leaders meeting twice or 3 times a year, and the premier have more frequent visits to each other. As you just said, 21 times the prime ministers of two countries have met. This time, I think just 2 months after the Hangzhou conference, President Xi Jinping and President Putin, I think they discussed the strategic issues and the security issues and foreign policies. And this time, I think Premier Li Keqiang in St. Petersburg, they talk specific cooperations between two countries. As far as I know, 21 agreements were signed during the visits, just 2 days visits in St. Petersburg. So I think this is a quite fruitful visits for specific cooperation between two countries.
Do you think such a cooperation between Russia and China may chiefly focus on energy and raw materials exchange?
I think that's the easiest place to look for clear wins for both countries. The Russian economy remains largely a resource extraction country, and China is as hungry for natural resources as pretty much every other country in the world combined. So there's a very logical fit between those two, and you should expect that, especially as we can expect sanctions on Russia to tighten substantially in the next year to two, we should think that Russia will look to Chinese markets as a way to relieve that economic pressure.
Thank you very much. Let me cross over to Moscow, where Alexander Lukin, a senior expert of Russia-China studies, standing by. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. What do you think of the outcome of Premier Li Keqiang's current visit to Moscow?
Well, I think it's, well, first of all, of course, it's an annual meeting, and there's nothing very special about it. But at the same time, there are some new phenomena going on in Russian-Chinese economic cooperation. And you know that prime ministers in now both countries are mostly in charge of the economy. Well, first, after the West sanctioned Russia, after the Ukrainian crisis, there was a very deep, a new step of cooperation, especially in the energy sector. Several big contracts were investment contracts, Chinese investment into Russian energy sector were signed in the 2015 and second, which not many people know, is that because of the devaluation of the Russian ruble, now Russia's exports of some products became cheaper, about twice cheaper, and because of that, Chinese people and China is buying now more and more, for example, Russia's agricultural products, Russian food products, things that before only Russia was buying from China, and Russia was buying from Europe, for example. Now China is buying more and more of that. So it's not only energy, but also other sectors are growing. So from that point of view, this step is very interesting.
Now, Alexander, after economic sanctions were imposed on Moscow following Crimea, and when China was confronted with back to Asia, the two major economies have obviously been brought closer and together. Do you think this serves as a strong catalyst for Russia to sell more advanced weaponry to China? For example, the S-400 surface-to-air missiles and Su-35, the fifth generation of fighter jets, and that indeed has alarmed the United States and its Western allies. What do you think of the implications of such mil-to-mil relationship?
Well, there are two ways of thinking of that. Some people say that the talks were already there and there was no great influence by the sanctions or worsening of relations between Russia and the West. But I personally think that this process pushed Russian-Chinese cooperation because, for example, as I said, before before the Ukrainian crisis, China did not invest into Russia's raw material sector, or almost not. It's not that it was allowed to do it, but somehow it tended to lose all the tenders and it just cannot do it. But now the Russian government even is very much in favor of Chinese investment. So this is one thing. And another thing is arms trade, as you said. Yes, before that somehow Russia did not sell to China S-400 and also this newest fighter planes, but now the contract somehow mysteriously was signed very quickly. So I think we were moving in this direction. I mean, our bilateral relations were already quite good, and they were moving, but in that direction. But our Western friends gave them a very good push.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Welcome back. Ambassador Hua, what do you think of the background against which we see the growing consensus and confidence building between Russia and China?
I think the reason that the China-Russian relationship has been developed very quick during the past 3 or 2 years is because of the increase of the trust between two countries. I think the trust between bilateral relationships is a very important fact. When we talk about Sino-American relationship, we always use a word of a deficit of trust. Mm-hmm. But the Sino-Russian relationship is something that's higher than Sino-US relation because of the trust between two nations and the leadership of two countries.
Right. We've been talking about the Ukrainian crisis, the takeover of Crimea by Putin following, the ouster of Yanukovych, the former Ukrainian president. Now, what about the other thing? For example, the back to Asia, and China thinks that this sounds a smacks of a geopolitical rivalry, and there's more likelihood for Hillary Clinton to be elected after FBI decided to close the investigation into the email scandal. What do you think of such a sort of concern?
So you should expect that the pivot to Asia will continue under Hillary Clinton, and that is an almost inevitable shift in American foreign policy to sort of accommodate and deal with and think about China's rise. If China responds to that by partnering with Russia, that's a reasonable response. That's sort of a response I would expect, but it is, I think, one that has risks that are not likely to be immediately apparent but will show up over time. A few, just as an example. One is that one considers that the Russian foreign policy under the most recent term of President Putin has become increasingly erratic and increasingly risk-seeking in a way that China, which has benefited more from the current global order than any other country, might become greatly uncomfortable with. Meddling with an American election is a bright red line that no country has ever crossed before. It's unlikely to believe that there won't be consequences, and countries that are willing to do that are showing themselves willing to accept risk because there will be retaliation that China might find an uncomfortable partner, to put it mildly.
Hillary was a Secretary of State during the first term of the Obama presidency, and she was the very person who engineered the Back to Asia strategy with the help of Jeffrey Beda and Campbell, the two very important advisors to Secretary Clinton. Now, do you foresee more of the same legacy and tradition of the Democrats in dealing with China in the first few years of Hillary, who is said to be the most promising hopeful?
I think that's not the problem with the Democrats in America. Because of the rise of China, there is a big concern about the future of China. So I think whoever is in power of the White House, Republicans or Democrats, there would be a kind of a policy pivot to China. Of course, the Obama administration, they call it the pivot to Asia. Maybe the Republicans will call it another thing. But I think the same policy would have been taken by the Americans because of the rise of China.
But they got to reassess China due to many major factors. Let's look at the allegation that the relationship has been raised to the best level, if not the highest level, between Russia and China ever since the founding of diplomatic relations between the former Soviet Union and China. Now, is it largely because of this? The brainchild of Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, is about the Euro Economic Union, and that is being connected with the Belt and Road Initiative, a very ambitious blueprint of President Xi Jinping, who put forward this initiative about 3 years ago. How do you look at the possibility that the momentum I mean, this initiative of Belt and Road will gain more momentum, and there will be more collaboration between the two major economies.
I would expect there to be more collaboration between the two major economies because the fit is natural enough that there are opportunities on both sides. The great risk there from the Chinese side is simply that the Russian economy is in trouble right now and is likely to see that trouble getting worse. So investments into Russia may not pay off in quite the same way you would expect them to. In terms of One Belt, One Road, it's a fascinating and strategic gambit by the Chinese government that I'm watching with great interest to see what happens. Because despite these interests, it seems likely that over very long distances, seaborne transportation and logistics are likely to remain considerably cheaper, which makes this a strategic as opposed to an economic play. And that will be a cost the government will have to be willing to subsidize for an extended period of time if it's going to see the benefits it wants. It may be willing to do that, but we're forecasting very far into the future at that point.
Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Hua Liming and Mr. Gautam Akunda. We are discussing the messages that Premier Li Keqiang's current official visit to Moscow may deliver about a better relationship between Moscow and Beijing after this trip has taken him to Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan and Latvia, where he met with leaders from 16 countries in Central and Eastern Europe. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Ambassador Hua Liming, in three major areas, I'm afraid diplomacy between Russia and China has been greatly enhanced, such as finding a political solution to the civil strife in Syria, nuclear disarmament in, not exactly nuclear disarmament in Iran, but talking more about how to lift the economic sanctions and lay the groundwork for Iran to develop its own civilian nuclear industry. And the third area, I'm afraid, is the deployment of a THAAD system in the ROK in Northeast Asia. What do they mean for the national security of Moscow and Beijing? How do you look at the mechanism, if any, that may have been built between Moscow and Beijing to address issues?
You see, Russia is a big power that is being his strategic space is being squeezed by the United States and the NATO. So Russians really feel uncomfortable when facing the United States and the hegemonism from the United States. So China and Russia shared many common points on the international issue. The points that you had just mentioned, the Syrian war, the Iran nuclear issue, and the THAAD system. And actually, the Chinese and the Russian delegations, the United Nations, especially Security Council of the United Nations, have very good coordination. And as we said, that the relation is a strategic partnership of a coordination. And these two delegations have very good coordinations over many issues of international issues. So I think that the main issue is Syria and the Iranian nuclear issue and the THAAD system and also others, the issues of international
Gautam, I still remember the angry protest that former American Special Envoy or Ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, who currently is the National Security Advisor to President Obama, after China and Russia joined hand in vetoing military interventions by the NATO in Syria. Do you think the United Nations Security Council is being used as yet another convincing platform to enhance multilateralism instead of encouraging the unilateralism that the United States sometimes prefers to adopt?
So I don't think the United States prefers to adopt unilateralism, but there are things that it is willing to do unilaterally if it cannot do them multilaterally. That's the distinction I would make. In this case, the UN Security Council is always that's what it's for. It's for countries to pursue their national interest. I just note that it's important to remember that from the American perspective on the Syrian civil war and the humanitarian tragedy there, our outrage over that is sincere. It is not a fake. It is not the United States pretending that it cares about these things because of other national interests. We genuinely care about these things, and we also care about other national interests. When China positions itself allying with Russia or with other states as enabling these sorts of massacres, that that is a consistent position on the part of the Chinese government that does not believe in outside intervention in countries, but it has a cost in the way that China is viewed in the United States, which for both national interest reasons and principled reasons just views these things differently.
Do you foresee increase of China's stakes in Syria?
I don't see many stakes in Syria for China. China and Russia took the same position in Security Council of the United Nations in 2011 when the draft resolution was put forward. But I would say China and Russia have different stakes in Syria. Russians have big strategic stakes in Syria. And when China vetoed the draft of resolution, the motivation was just to defend a rule, defend the international rule, that no sovereign state or head of a sovereign state should be overthrown by outsiders. And regime change should be decided by the domestic people of
Are you actually
this country.
referring to the ouster and killing of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya?
The same thing.
The same thing, right. So do you believe that the UN, NATO, which may have been authorized or may not have been authorized by the UN Security Council, stepped in and should be held responsible for the regime change in Tripoli? Are you surprised that China and Russia feel extremely uneasy about the military interventionism in the Middle East, which may have wreaked havoc and led to the refugee exodus?
So I don't think I'm not surprised that they are uncomfortable with that at all. I think that China's perspective on that will change pretty rapidly over the next few years for a variety of reasons. One is, I don't think that the American intervention in Libya had anything to do with the refugee exodus. That's a whole different the set of causality that leads from the Iraq War to the refugee exodus is complex. And I think the United States, on the whole, rather regrets doing the Iraq War and would never want that experience again. So, in a sense, we have learned that lesson without needing help from other countries to push it onto us. But I think as China shifts from being a regional to a global power, it is going to learn pretty quickly, and is in fact in the process of learning, that internal issues in countries can very rapidly become external issues, as we're seeing in Syria with refugee flows that are threatening to destabilize governments in the region and even out into Europe. And the Chinese government is going to have an answer for those problems that extends beyond we don't interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. That simply will not be an option. When the Americans think about the rise of China, which, remember, we not only are not antagonistic to, the United States is in favor of. It has done a lot to enable the rise of China. What we always say is responsible stakeholder. We want a China that plays by the rules of the game and supports the system. Russia is becoming the quintessential irresponsible stakeholder right now. We don't want that to continue, but it looks like that is how they have chosen to behave. China's choice is to emulate the course that it has tried to take of being a responsible stakeholder or emulating Russia is the one that will determine the future of this relationship in a profound way.
Very philosophical comments on the trajectory of China's global strategy, particularly in the volatile region of the Middle East. Very good points, well taken. Let's look at, in our review of Premier Li Keqiang's visit to Latvia, 4 years ago, such a mechanism of 16+1 was inaugurated. And what do you think of the growing importance concerning China's investment in the infrastructure construction in those countries?
You see, 16+1 mechanism is unique in the world. I think that there is no similar mechanism in the world. If we look at the 16 countries, 7 of them were former socialist countries in the Soviet bloc, like countries like Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Albania, and so on. Czechoslovakia. And 3 of them were former Soviet republics, like Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania.
The 3 Baltic states.
Baltic states. And the other 6 or other 5 were member states of a former Yugoslavia, like Croatia, like Slovenia, like Montenegro, and other countries. So they are European countries, but they are different from the Western European countries. The economy is not very strong. And they are on the road of Eurasia Union and on the road of Silk Belt and Road. So actually China has much to do with these Central or Eastern European countries, and China can use its capability of manufacturing, capability of infrastructure to assist these countries and to create the win-win cooperation between China and the Eastern European countries.
Among all other options, I'm afraid one may serve as a strong impetus for at least 4 of the member states of the 16+1, Poland, Hungary, Czech, Slovakia. The 4 countries met before Bratislava, a city in Czechoslovakia, to discuss how they should gain more autonomy about the refugee issue and about how to protect the traditional border, so that they will not always get orders from Brussels. Do you think such contextual message is very helpful in promoting better understanding in our understanding of the 16+1 mechanism?
So the refugee issue is becoming a political crisis throughout much of Europe, and it's likely to drive a lot of different political pressures in Eastern Europe and even in Western Europe, as we're seeing in Germany right now. The way in which these issues interact is going to become something that, again, as the shift from a regional to a global power is going to become incredibly important. What China needs, I'm sort of excited to be here with my colleague, because he's such a sort of diplomat of such a great renown. That sort of delicate balancing act of understanding the context, that how Poland differs from the Czech Republic, is something it's not easy to do. It takes a long time to learn, and we're watching the Chinese government develop that capacity remarkably quickly, aided by the fact that it has resources that no other country in the world is willing to deploy. The sort of sheer spending on infrastructure and investments that the One Belt, One Road project exemplifies. The United States could do that, but it is not going to for the foreseeable future due to its own political constraints. So China is essentially the only player in that game, and it seems to be playing it very well.
Why do you think the United States keeps a distance from this area, the former member states of the Soviet bloc, as well as the 3 Baltic states?
I don't think the United States has kept distance with these Eastern European countries, just because of the United States not very much interested for infrastructure and the manufacturing capacities for these countries. What the United States is interested in is the security and the strategic issues.
Perhaps
for instance, they have installed their strategic system, a ballistic missile system in Eastern European countries like Poland and Romania.
Right, missile shield programs in Poland and Czech on the border of Russia. That has ruffled the feather of Moscow, more or less. So with that, we come to the end of this discussion about Premier Li Keqiang's current official visit to Moscow, which took him to other countries such as Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Latvia. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.